Mrs. Patricia Henderson had taught at Riverside High School for 15 years. She prided herself on her traditional values and high standards, but beneath that facade lay deeply rooted prejudices she'd never examined. Tea started on a Monday morning in her AP English class. Jasmine Williams, a bright 16-year-old black student, raised her hand to share her interpretation of a Langston Hughes poem. Mrs. Henderson, I think Hughes is speaking about the duality of black identity in America. Jasmine, Mrs. Henderson interrupted with a condescending smile. Perhaps you should focus on understanding the basic text before attempting complex analysis. Students like you often struggle with these classical works. The classroom fell silent. The racist undertone was unmistakable. Over the following weeks, it got worse. Mrs. Henderson would question Jasmine's work for plagiarism while never doubting white students make snide comments about affirmative action when discussing college, consistently give Jasmine lower grades despite her excellent work, seat her at the back, saying she was disruptive when she never was. Jasmine endured it quietly, documenting everything. 3 months later, the school announced a special assembly. A distinguished guest would be speaking about a new scholarship program. Mrs. Henderson sat smugly in the faculty section, whispering to colleagues about how certain students didn't deserve such opportunities. The principal took the microphone. Please welcome Dr. Marcus Williams, renowned civil rights attorney and founder of the Excellent Scholarship Foundation. A distinguished black man in his 50s walked onto the stage. Mrs. Henderson barely paid attention. Dr. Williams has generously donated $2 million to our school district, the principal continued. But he's here for another reason today. Dr. Williams, the floor is yours. Thank you, he began, his voice commanding respect. I'm here because my daughter, Jasmine Williams, is a student at this school. She's told me about her experiences in a certain teacher's classroom. Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. Dr. Williams didn't name her publicly, but he didn't need to. He spoke about systemic racism in education, about teachers who perpetuate harm, and about accountability. After the assembly, Mrs. Henderson was called to the principal's office. Dr. Williams was there, along with the superintendent and a school board member. Jasmine had documented everything: dates, comments, graded papers showing bias. Mrs. Henderson, the superintendent said gravely, we're conducting a full investigation. Other students have now come forward with similar complaints. The investigation revealed a pattern spanning years. Multiple students of color had experienced her discrimination, but had been too afraid to speak up. Mrs. Henderson was suspended immediately. The investigation concluded within 2 weeks. She was terminated and her teaching license was revoked by the state board. Jasmine went on to win the Excellence Scholarship. She gave a speech at graduation about resilience and the importance of standing up to injustice. Mrs. Henderson, meanwhile, couldn't find work in education anywhere. Her reputation had preceded her. She was forced to confront what she'd spent years denying, that her prejudices had destroyed not only students' dignity but ultimately her own career. Years later, Jasmine became an educator herself, dedicated to ensuring no student would ever face what she had endured. Patricia Henderson sat in her small apartment, scrolling through job listings for the 3rd time that week. Administrative assistant. Retail manager. Nothing in education, never again in education. Her teaching career was over, her reputation destroyed, and her pension significantly reduced due to the termination. She'd spent these 5 years in bitterness, convincing herself she was the victim. But lately, something had been shifting inside her. It was a rainy Tuesday when Patricia walked into the local community center for a mandatory employment workshop. As she signed in, she froze, the workshop facilitator's name on the board, Jasmine Williams, Master of Education. Patricia's first instinct was to leave. But she needed this certificate for her unemployment benefits. She slipped into the back row, hoping to go unnoticed. Jasmine entered the room with quiet confidence, now 23 and poised beyond her years. She graduated early from college and earned her master's in education. As she began speaking about overcoming workplace challenges and discrimination, her eyes swept the room. They landed on Patricia. For a moment, time stopped. Then Jasmine did something Patricia never expected. She gave a small, acknowledging nod and continued her presentation. As others filed out, Patricia remained seated, paralyzed. Jasmine approached slowly. Mrs. Henderson, she said softly. I should go with Patricia stammered, gathering her things. Wait. Jasmine's voice was firm but not unkind. Can we talk? Just 5 minutes. They sat in the empty room, an uncomfortable silence between them. Why? Patricia finally asked, her voice cracking. Why didn't you have me thrown out? Jasmine took a deep breath. Because I learned something you never taught me in your classroom, that healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from truth and accountability. Do you understand what you did to me? Jasmine asked directly. Not just the grades or the comments. You made me question my worth. You made me feel like I had to be twice as good to be seen as half as worthy. Patricia felt tears burning her eyes. For 5 years, she'd avoided this reckoning. I don't know what to say, Patricia whispered. I told myself I was just maintaining standards. That I treated everyone fairly. But you didn't, Jasmine said. And deep down, you knew it. Patricia nodded slowly, the dam finally breaking. You're right. I was raised with certain beliefs. I thought I'd moved past them, but I just buried them. I took out my own insecurities and prejudices on students who reminded me of everything I feared or didn't understand. At least that's honest, Jasmine said. What happened to you? Jasmine continued, that was accountability, not karma. Karma would be if you became bitter and learned nothing. But you have a choice now. Patricia looked up, confused. I run anti-bias workshops for adults trying to unlearn prejudice, Jasmine explained. It's hard work. Uncomfortable work. Most people quit. But some people genuinely change. She slid a flyer across the table. I'm not offering forgiveness, that's not mine to give for all the students you hurt over the years. But I'm offering you a path forward. If you're willing to do the real work. Patricia stared at the flyer, then at this young woman she'd tried to diminish. Why would you help me? Because my father taught me something, Jasmine said, standing to leave. He said the goal isn't just to punish racism, it's to end it. And that only happens when people actually change, not just when they lose their jobs. Patricia sat in a circle with 11 other people in Jasmine's workshop, teachers, managers, community members, all confronting their own biases. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, facing her prejudices directly, understanding the harm she'd caused. She volunteered at the community center, helping with literacy programs in underserved neighborhoods. She wrote letters of apology to former students who agreed to receive them. Most never responded. Some did, their words painful but necessary. She would never teach again, she'd lost that privilege. But she could do this work, this uncomfortable, necessary work of changing herself. One evening, after a particularly difficult workshop session, Jasmine found Patricia sitting alone in the hallway, quietly crying. It never gets easier, does it? Patricia asked. Seeing clearly what you were. No, Jasmine said, sitting beside her. But that discomfort means you're actually changing. The real karma wasn't losing your job, Mrs. Henderson. The real karma is having to live with full awareness of the harm you caused, and choosing to be better despite knowing you can never undo it. Patricia nodded. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, Jasmine said. Because this isn't about that. It's about making sure the next generation of students never has a teacher like who you were. As Jasmine walked away, Patricia realized something profound. The student she'd tried to break had become the teacher she'd needed all along. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. Patricia Henderson stared at her laptop screen, reading it 3 times to make sure she understood. Subject: Documentary project From Harm to Healing. Conversations on Race and Education. Dear Ms. Henderson, my name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. Dr. Jasmine Williams has told me your story. I'm creating a film about racism in education and the possibility of genuine transformation. Jasmine has agreed to participate. She suggested you might be willing to share your journey as well. This won't be easy. You'll be publicly acknowledging your past actions. But Jasmine believes your story, the full story, might help other educators confront their own biases before they cause the harm you did. Are you willing? Patricia's hands trembled. Going public meant everyone would know, her former colleagues, her family, the entire community. But she thought of the students she'd harmed, the ones whose names she'd never even learned because she'd never seen them as fully human. She typed her response, yes. I'm willing. 3 months later, Patricia sat under bright lights in a small studio. Marcus is the filmmaker, sat across from her with Jasmine beside him. This was their 3rd session. The first 2 had been Patricia alone, telling her story. Today, they would talk together. Let's start with the moment you realized what you'd become, Marcus said gently. Patricia took a shaky breath. I don't think there was one moment. It was layers. First, I had to admit I'd treated Jasmine unfairly. That took months. Then I had to admit it wasn't just Jasmine, it was a pattern. That took longer. But the hardest part was admitting that I'd become exactly what I would have denied being, a racist. Say more about that, Jasmine prompted, her voice steady. I grew up thinking racists were people in white hoods or people who used slurs, Patricia continued. I told myself I couldn't be racist because I wasn't that. But racism isn't just extremism. It's in the assumptions I made about which students were naturally gifted versus which ones worked hard. It's in whose work I scrutinized versus whose I trusted. It's in the 100 small cruelties I called high standards. The camera kept rolling as tears streamed down Patricia's face. I convinced myself I was helping, that I was preparing students like Jasmine for a tough world. But I was just perpetuating the very toughness I claimed to prepare them for. I was the obstacle I pretended to help them overcome. Marcus turned to Jasmine. What made you decide to help her after what she did to you? Jasmine was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Honestly? At first, I didn't want to. When I saw her in that workshop, my first instinct was anger. She took something from me, my joy in learning, my confidence, my sense of safety in a classroom. For months after her class, I second-guessed every achievement, wondering if I was really good enough or if people were just being nice. Patricia closed her eyes, absorbing the pain she'd caused. But my father always taught me to think systemically, Jasmine continued. Mrs. Henderson wasn't an isolated case. She was a product of a system, and she was also perpetuating that system. Punishing her didn't change the system. I realized that if even one teacher watched this documentary and recognized themselves before they caused harm, that would prevent what happened to me from happening to someone else. Do you forgive her? Marcus asked. That's the wrong question, Jasmine said firmly. Forgiveness is personal and private, and it's not owed. The better question is, has she done the work to ensure she never harms anyone like that again? And is she helping dismantle the system that enabled her in the first place? She turned to Patricia. Have you? Patricia looked directly at Jasmine. I can't undo what I did. I've written letters, I've apologized, I've sat with the discomfort of knowing that I damaged students' lives. But apologies are just words. She pulled out a folder. So I've been doing something else. I've been documenting everything I can remember about the system that protected me. She spread papers on the table, detailed notes about administrator complaints that were ignored, patterns of racial disparities in discipline and grading, teachers who'd expressed concerns and been silenced. I was never just one bad apple, Patricia said. I was protected. When parents of color complained about me, they were labeled difficult. When students reported bias, it was dismissed as misunderstanding. The system wanted to protect its reputation more than its students. What are you doing with this information? Marcus asked. I've been working with the State Education Department's Equity Task Force, Patricia answered. I've testified about how bias flourishes in schools. I've helped develop teacher training programs. And I've been consulting with school districts to identify the red flags that administrators ignored in my case. She looked at Jasmine. You asked if I've done the work. I don't think that work ever ends. Every day, I have to choose to confront my conditioning. But yes, I'm trying. Not for redemption, I don't think I get that, but because it's the only moral choice I have left. During a break in filming, Patricia and Jasmine stood outside, both exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. Can I tell you something? Patricia asked quietly. About that day in class when you raised your hand to discuss the Langston Hughes poem? Jasmine nodded. I cut you off because your interpretation was brilliant, Patricia admitted. Better than anything I'd prepared. And for a split second, I felt threatened. A black teenager understood something about literature, about America, that I didn't. And instead of learning from you, I tried to diminish you. Patricia's voice broke. That's what racism does. It robs everyone. I robbed myself of being a better teacher. I robbed other students of learning from your insights. And I robbed you of the joy and recognition you deserved. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. That's the first time you've named the real core of it. Not just that you were biased, but why? The fear of being challenged. The fear of not being superior. I'm still afraid, Patricia confessed. Every day. Afraid of messing up, saying the wrong thing, not understanding. But I've learned that the fear isn't an excuse to stay ignorant. It's a sign that I need to listen more and talk less. 6 months after filming wrapped, the documentary premiered at a national education conference. The response was intense, praise, criticism, discomfort, dialogue, but the real test came when Patricia was invited to speak at Riverside High School's board meeting about implementing new anti-bias policies. As she walked into the familiar building, memories flooded back. Her old classroom. The hallways where she'd wielded power without accountability, the boardroom was packed. She recognized some faces, former colleagues, parents, students. Some looked angry. Some looked curious. Dr. Marcus Williams was there, sitting in the front row. He'd never spoken to her directly since that day in the principal's office 5 years ago. His expression was unreadable. Patricia approached the microphone, her prepared notes shaking in her hands. My name is Patricia Henderson. 7 years ago, I was a teacher at this school. And I was fired because I was racist. The room erupted in whispers. I'm not here to ask for sympathy or forgiveness, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I'm here because the system that enabled me is still in place. And until we address it, there will be other teachers like I was. For the next 20 minutes, Patricia detailed specific policy changes, mandatory bias training with accountability measures, anonymous reporting systems for students, demographic analysis of grading and discipline patterns, and transparent investigation processes for discrimination complaints. These policies won't fix everything, she concluded. But they would have caught me sooner. They might have even changed me before I caused the harm I did. Every day I live with the knowledge that I damaged students' lives. I can't undo that. But I can make sure this school does better. As she stepped away from the microphone, Dr. Williams stood up. The room went silent. I want to say something, he began, his powerful voice filling the space. When Miss Henderson hurt my daughter, I wanted her destroyed. I wanted her to lose everything. And she did. He paused, looking directly at Patricia. But my daughter taught me something I needed to learn. She taught me that justice without transformation is just revenge. And revenge doesn't protect the next child. He turned to address the board. I've watched Miss Henderson's work over the past 2 years. I've read her testimonies. I've seen her documentary. And I've verified that the policy recommendations she's making are backed by research and best practices. Dr. Williams took a breath. I'm not saying we should forget what she did. We shouldn't. But I am saying that we should implement these policies. Not because she deserves redemption, but because our students deserve protection. The board voted unanimously to adopt the new policies that night. Jasmine Williams stood in front of her own classroom now, a 9th-grade English teacher at Riverside High School. She'd fought to be placed there specifically, to reclaim the space where she'd been harmed and transform it into something healing. Her desk was a framed poem, one her students had written collectively about identity and resilience. There was a knock on her classroom door. Patricia Henderson stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. I'm sorry to interrupt, Patricia said. I'm here for the volunteer literacy program. They said you're the supervising teacher? Jasmine had known this was coming. She'd been the one to approve Patricia's volunteer application. Come in, Jasmine said. Patricia entered slowly, looking around the room. You've made it beautiful. So many student voices on the walls. That's the point, Jasmine said. Every student's voice matters here. Every student is seen. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. I won't pretend this isn't complicated, Jasmine finally said. You working here, in this building, after everything. People have opinions about it. I know, Patricia said quietly. If you change your mind about me volunteering, I won't, Jasmine interrupted. Not because I've forgotten, but because the students in the literacy program need support. And you've proven you can provide that support without causing harm. But understand something, you're not here for your healing. You're here for them. I understand, Patricia said. And one more thing, Jasmine added, her voice firm. If I ever see even a hint of the teacher you used to be, if any student ever feels diminished by you, you're done. Not just here. I'll make sure everyone knows. Do we have an understanding? Yes, Patricia said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. That evening, Jasmine sat at her desk grading papers when she noticed an envelope tucked under her door. Inside was a handwritten letter from Patricia. Dear Jasmine, I won't give this to you directly because I know you don't owe me your time or attention. But I wanted you to know what happened today. I worked with 5 students in the literacy program. One of them, Marcus, named after your father, coincidentally, struggled with reading a passage about civil rights. He got frustrated and said, I'm just not smart enough for this stuff. The old me would have confirmed his fears with silence or false comfort. But because of the work you've pushed me to do, I recognized what was really happening. He wasn't struggling with intelligence. He was struggling with a passage that used complex language to describe trauma his own family had lived through. It wasn't about smart or not smart. It was about context and connection. So we talked about his grandfather's experiences. We connected the text to his life. And suddenly, he understood, not just the passage, but his own capacity to understand. Afterward, he said, thanks for not making me feel stupid, Miss Henderson. I wanted to cry. Because 7 years ago, I would have done exactly that, made him feel stupid. Made him doubt himself. All because of my own limitations and prejudices. You gave me the chance to be different today. To help instead of harm. I know that doesn't erase the past. But it meant everything to me to be able to do for Marcus what I failed to do for you. You don't have to respond to this. I just wanted you to know that the work continues, and it continues because you refuse to let hatred be the final answer to hatred. With profound gratitude and eternal regret, Patricia. Jasmine read the letter twice, then filed it away in a folder labeled accountability. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. Accountability. From Harm to Healing went on to win several film festival awards and became mandatory viewing in teacher education programs across 12 states. Patricia's unflinching testimony about her racism became a teaching tool, sparking uncomfortable but necessary conversations. She received hundreds of messages. Some were hateful, calling her a traitor or attention seeker. Others were grateful, from educators who recognized themselves in her story and wanted to change before causing harm, but the messages that affected her most were from former students. You gave me a C on every paper despite my work being identical to white students who got A's. I gave up on writing because of you. I'm 28 now and just enrolled in community college, finally believing I can do this. I was the only Latina in your AP class. You told my parents I should consider more realistic colleges. I went to Yale anyway, but it took years to stop hearing your voice in my head, telling me I wasn't good enough. I transferred schools because of you. Best decision I ever made. Patricia printed each message and kept them in a binder. On nights when she felt proud of her volunteer work or her advocacy, she read them. Reminders that growth didn't erase harm. That accountability was forever. 5 years after the documentary's release, Patricia was facilitating her own anti-bias workshop for new teachers when a young woman approached her during the break. Ms. Henderson? You probably don't remember me. I was in your English class. 11 years ago. Patricia's heart sank. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but Taylor Mitchell. I was one of your favorites. Patricia remembered then. Taylor had been a white student, quiet, consistently earned high marks. I need to tell you something, Taylor continued, her voice shaking. I've been teaching for 3 years now. And last month, I caught myself doing exactly what you used to do. I questioned a black student's work for plagiarism while never doubting white students. I gave harsher critiques to students of color. I was becoming you, the old you. Tears streamed down Taylor's face. I watched your documentary last week. And I realized I learned more from watching you teach than from what you taught. I learned that some students deserve suspicion. That some students are inherently less capable. I learned racism, Ms. Henderson. You taught me racism. Patricia felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She'd spent years thinking about the students she'd directly harmed, but she'd never fully considered this, the students she'd taught to be racist themselves. What are you doing about it? Patricia asked quietly. I'm here, aren't I? Taylor said. I enrolled in your workshop. I'm starting therapy to examine my biases. I'm reviewing every grade I've given with a colleague of color. And I'm terrified because I don't know how much damage I've already done. Patricia nodded slowly. The terror is good. It means you're waking up. But don't stop at terror. Use it. They talked for another hour after the workshop ended. Patricia shared resources, connected Taylor with other educators doing anti-racism work, and gave her the hardest advice of all: you'll mess up. You'll catch yourself in biased thoughts. The work is to notice faster and correct quicker. And to never, ever stop examining yourself. As Taylor left, Patricia sat alone in the empty room, struck by a devastating realization: her legacy of harm extended further than she'd imagined. She hadn't just hurt the students she discriminated against, she'd taught an entire generation of white students that such discrimination was acceptable, normal, even expected. The work, she understood, would truly never end. 10 years after the initial incident, Patricia received a formal invitation that made her hands shake. The Excellence Scholarship Foundation cordially invites you to our 10th anniversary gala honoring a decade of educational equity. Guest speaker, Dr. Jasmine Williams. Special recognition, the power of transformation. Patricia called Jasmine immediately. Did you know about this? Did your father? Yes, Jasmine said calmly. He wants you there. We both do. Why? Patricia asked, genuinely confused. Because your story is part of our story now, Jasmine explained. The foundation has prevented discrimination against thousands of students. We've changed policies in hundreds of schools. And a significant part of that success came from you being willing to expose how the system failed. I don't deserve to be celebrated for that, Patricia protested. You're not being celebrated, Jasmine corrected. You're being acknowledged. There's a difference. The foundation's work is being celebrated. You're just a complicated footnote in that story. But you're an important footnote. The ballroom was filled with educators, students, donors, and advocates. Patricia sat at a table in the back, feeling profoundly out of place among the accomplishments being celebrated. Dr. Marcus Williams took the stage, his presence commanding as always. 10 years ago, my daughter experienced something no student should experience, he began. She was systematically discriminated against by a teacher who allowed prejudice to trump professionalism. Patricia felt hundreds of eyes turn toward her. I wanted revenge, Dr. Williams continued. I wanted that teacher destroyed. And she was both professionally, financially, reputationally. But my daughter asked me a question that changed everything. Dad, what happens after revenge? Does it protect the next student? He paused, his voice thick with emotion. So we built something bigger than revenge. We built a foundation. We changed laws. We trained thousands of teachers. We created systems of accountability that didn't exist before. And yes, controversially, we allowed the teacher who harmed my daughter to participate in that work. The room erupted in whispers. Patricia Henderson is here tonight, Dr. Williams said. Stand up, Miss Henderson. Patricia's legs barely supported her as she stood, face burning with shame and fear. Look at her, Dr. Williams commanded the room. She represents something important, proof that people can change, but also proof that change doesn't erase harm. She lost her career. She lost her reputation. She lives every day with the knowledge of the damage she caused. And she spent a decade trying to prevent others from following her path. He looked directly at Patricia. Do I like her? No. Have I forgiven her? That's between me and my conscience. But has she been useful in our fight for educational equity? Undeniably yes. Dr. Williams turned back to the audience. We don't need to like everyone who helps dismantle racist systems. We just need them to actually do the work. And then we need to watch them like hawks to make sure they never cause harm again. The room burst into complicated applause, some enthusiastic, some reluctant, some refusing to clap at all. When Jasmine took the stage, the room quieted immediately. She'd become a powerful voice in education reform, respected and admired. I want to talk about the cost of transformation, she began. Not the transformation of systems, we celebrate that tonight. But the personal cost of transforming from victim to advocate. She described her journey, the therapy, the anger, the moments of doubt, the decision to help Patricia despite not wanting to. People ask me if I've forgiven her, Jasmine said. Here's my answer, forgiveness is personal, private, and optional. What's not optional is justice. What's not optional is making sure the next generation doesn't suffer what I suffered. She looked out at the audience. Patricia Henderson can't teach anymore. That's appropriate, she lost that privilege. But she can testify. She can train. She can expose the systems that protected her. And I decided that was more valuable than keeping her frozen in shame. Jasmine's voice grew stronger. But let me be crystal clear, this is not a redemption story. This is an accountability story. Patricia gets to help repair the damage she caused, but she doesn't get absolution. She doesn't get her teaching license back. She doesn't get to be celebrated as a hero. She gets to work every day, knowing she can never fully undo the harm she caused. She paused, letting that sink in. That's what real accountability looks like. Not punishment that feels good in the moment but changes nothing. Accountability that transforms systems while never letting individuals forget the weight of their choices. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the gala, as the ballroom emptied, Patricia found herself alone with Dr. Williams for the first time since that devastating day in the principal's office. They stood in uncomfortable silence. I don't expect you to speak to me, Patricia finally said. But I need you to know, not a day goes by that I don't think about Jasmine. About what I took from her. About what I took from all of them. Dr. Williams studied her for a long moment. Do you want me to make you feel better about that? Tell you you're forgiven? That you've done enough? No, Patricia said quickly. I don't deserve that. Good, Dr. Williams said. Because you're right. You don't. He stepped closer, his voice low and intense. You hurt my daughter. You hurt dozens, maybe hundreds of students over your career. The fact that you're trying to make amends now doesn't erase that. It doesn't balance the scales. Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. But, Dr. Williams continued, his voice softening slightly, Jasmine is right that your work has prevented harm to others. So I'll say this once, I don't forgive you. I don't like you. But I respect that you chose the hardest path available to you, actually changing instead of just hiding in shame. He started to walk away, then turned back. And Ms. Henderson? If you ever slip, if you ever show even a hint of the person you were, I will end whatever's left of your ability to do this work. We're watching. Always. I understand, Patricia whispered. Thank you for watching. I need you to. Patricia Henderson was 72 years old when she received an invitation to Riverside High School's Wall of Educational Excellence. The school was honoring educators who had significantly impacted education in the district. Jasmine Williams was being honored. So were 12 other teachers and administrators, and, controversially, so was Patricia Henderson, not as an educator, but in a special category, those who transformed education through accountability. The plaque was brutally honest. Patricia Henderson, former teacher, Riverside High School, 1990 to 2015, terminated for racial discrimination and bias against students of color. Subsequently dedicated herself to anti-bias education, policy reform, and preventing others from causing similar harm. Honored not for redemption, but for choosing accountability over denial. Transformation doesn't erase harm, but accountability can prevent future harm. Patricia stood before the plaque, surrounded by current students who had no memory of her as a teacher. A young black girl, maybe 14, read the plaque carefully. "So you were actually racist?" the girl asked bluntly. "Yes," Patricia answered, not sugarcoating it. "I was." "And they put you on the wall anyway?" Another student seemed confused. "Not to celebrate me," Patricia explained. "To show that when people cause harm, there are consequences. But also that people who caused harm have a responsibility to help fix the systems that enabled them." "That's weird," a third student said. "Usually we just cancel people and move on." "Maybe," Patricia acknowledged. "But canceling me for firing me, destroying my career, that was step one. It had to happen. But step two was, what do we learn from this? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? That's been my work for 20 years. Jasmine Williams approached, now in her 40s, the principal of Riverside High School. She'd fought hard to return to this building, to transform it from the place of her trauma into a place of healing and excellence. "Miss Henderson," Jasmine said formally, they'd never moved to first names, even after 2 decades. "Principal Williams," Patricia replied with equal formality. They stood together, looking at the wall of plaques. "Do you think it was the right choice?" Patricia asked quietly. "Putting me on this wall?" Jasmine considered the question. "I think it's the honest choice. You're part of this school's history. The worst parts and the transformative parts. Pretending you don't exist doesn't help these students understand how racism works or how systems change." A teacher approached with a question for Jasmine, and she excused herself. Patricia was left alone with the students, who peppered her with questions. "Do you think you're a good person now? Did you apologize to everyone you hurt? What made you racist in the first place? Are you going to mess up again?" Patricia answered each question honestly, never deflecting, never making excuses. Finally, one student asked, "Was it worth it? Doing all this work?" Patricia thought carefully. "Worth it implies I had a choice or that I deserve credit. I didn't have a choice, not morally. When you cause harm, you have a responsibility to try to prevent future harm. It's not optional. As for whether it was worth it, that's not for me to say. You'd have to ask the students who might have been harmed by teachers who changed their behavior because of this work." The student nodded slowly, seeming to understand. That evening, Patricia sat in her modest apartment, looking at the commemorative program from the ceremony. Her plaque was listed in a separate section, clearly differentiated from the honored educators. Her phone rang. It was Jasmine. "I wanted to check on you," Jasmine said. "Today was intense." "It was appropriate," Patricia replied. "Uncomfortable but appropriate." There was a pause. "Miss Henderson," Jasmine said slowly, "I want to tell you something I've never said before. I'm going to say it once, and then we're never going to discuss it again." Patricia's heart raced. "What you did to me, to us, it was devastating. It shaped my entire life. Every achievement I've had has been shadowed by having to prove you wrong. Every student I teach, I'm hyper-aware of not being you. The harm was real and lasting." Patricia closed her eyes, absorbing it. "But," Jasmine continued, "the work you've done over these 20 years has prevented that harm from happening to thousands of other students. That doesn't erase what you did to me. It doesn't balance the scales. But it matters. It counts for something." "Thank you," Patricia whispered. "I'm not done," Jasmine said firmly. "I'm telling you this not so you feel better about yourself, but because you need to understand the impact of accountability. Real, sustained, uncomfortable accountability. That's what changed everything. Not your guilt. Not your apologies. Your willingness to be held accountable forever." "I understand," Patricia said. "I know you do," Jasmine replied. "That's why the work continues. Good night, Miss Henderson." "Good night, Principal Williams." Patricia Henderson died at 78, in her sleep, in the small apartment she'd lived in since losing her teaching position. She left behind no family, she'd never married, never had children, but she left behind something else: 20 years of detailed documentation about systemic racism in education. Video testimonies. Training materials. Policy recommendations. A complete archive of one educator's journey from perpetrator to accountability advocate. Her will donated everything to the Excellence Scholarship Foundation, with one condition: it must always be presented in full context, never sanitized, never used to suggest that redemption is easy or complete. At her memorial service, small, attended mostly by people from the anti-bias education community, Jasmine Williams spoke. Patricia Henderson hurt me, Jasmine said simply. That's where this story starts, and that's something that never changes, no matter what came after. She was a racist teacher who abused her power and damaged students. She paused. But she was also someone who, when confronted with the truth about herself, chose the hardest possible path. Not the path of denial or defensiveness or playing the victim. She chose accountability. Real accountability, for the rest of her life. Jasmine looked at the simple casket. I never forgave her. That's important to say. Forgiveness was never required or expected. What was required was that she stop causing harm and start preventing it. And she did that. Dr. Marcus Williams, now in his 80s, stood to speak as well. My daughter asked me once why we allowed Patricia Henderson to participate in our work, he said. I told her, because justice without transformation is just revenge, and revenge doesn't protect anyone. He looked around the sparse gathering. Patricia Henderson's story is not a story of redemption. It's a story of consequences and accountability. She lost her career. She lost her reputation. She spent 20 years living with the weight of the harm she caused. That's what accountability looks like. But, he continued, she also spent 20 years ensuring other students wouldn't experience what my daughter experienced. That's what responsibility looks like. Both can be true. Jasmine Williams returned to Riverside High School after the memorial service. In her office, she pulled out a locked box she'd kept for 20 years. Inside were letters, every letter Patricia had ever written to her. Apologies, updates on her work, reflections on her journey. Jasmine had never responded to most of them. The bottom of the box was an envelope marked to be opened only after my death. Patricia had given it to Jasmine 5 years earlier. Jasmine opened it with shaking hands. Dear Principal Williams, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Good. I've lived too long with the knowledge of what I did, and I'm tired. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness in death that I never asked for in life. I'm writing to release you from something you never asked for, the burden of my transformation. For 20 years, you've had to carry me in your story. The teacher who hurt you became the project you helped transform, became the cautionary tale you used to educate others. You never signed up for that. I forced my way into your narrative, first through harm and then through accountability. I want you to know, you can let me go now, tell my story when it's useful. Forget me when it's not. You don't owe me space in your life or your legacy. What I hope is that the work continues without me being central to it. That the systems we helped change outlast both of us. That students 20 years from now are protected by policies that don't require my story to justify them. You asked me once if I thought I was a good person. I never answered because the question is irrelevant. I was a person who caused devastating harm and then spent the rest of my life trying to prevent others from doing the same. Whether that makes me good is for people like you to judge, and I genuinely don't need to know the answer. What I do know is this: you were 16 years old when I tried to destroy your spirit. You're now 43, and you've built a life of protecting students I would have harmed. If there's any meaning to the last 20 years of my life, it's that I got to witness the world you built in spite of me and, in some small way, support it. It's not redemption. It's just slightly less awful than the alternative. Live fully, Principal Williams. Let the weight of my story go when you're ready. With eternal accountability and gratitude, Patricia Henderson. Jasmine sat in her office, crying for the first time in years, not for Patricia, but for the 16-year-old girl she'd been, who'd had to carry this weight for so long. She thought about the hundreds of students she'd taught and protected. The policies she'd implemented. The systems she'd changed. Patricia Henderson was part of that story, but Jasmine realized she'd been right. She could let her go now. The next day, Jasmine added one final item to the wall of educational excellence at Riverside High School. It wasn't a plaque for Patricia or for herself. It was a statement: this wall exists to remind us that education is never neutral. We either work toward justice or we perpetuate harm. We either hold ourselves accountable or we protect systems of oppression. There is no middle ground. Choose wisely. The documentary From Harm to Healing was still shown in teacher education programs. Patricia Henderson's testimonies were still used in anti-bias training. The policies she'd helped develop had been adopted by school districts across the country, but increasingly, her name was fading into context. She was becoming what she'd wanted to be, not a cautionary tale with a name and face, but simply evidence that systems could change when people chose accountability over denial. Jasmine Williams retired from education at 60, having spent 30 years transforming Riverside High School into a national model for educational equity. She'd taught hundreds of students, mentored dozens of teachers, and changed countless lives. On her last day, a young teacher approached her. "Principal Williams, can I ask you something? The Patricia Henderson story, is it true? Did all of that really happen?" Jasmine smiled softly. "Every word." "Why?" "Because it gives me hope," the young teacher said. "Not hope that people can be redeemed, I understand that's not the point. But hope that when we mess up, when we cause harm despite our best intentions, there's still a path forward that isn't just guilt or denial." "That's exactly the point," Jasmine said. "The path forward is accountability. Real, sustained, uncomfortable accountability. Not for forgiveness or redemption, but because it's the only moral choice." The young teacher nodded, understanding. As Jasmine walked out of Riverside High School for the last time, she thought about the girl she'd been.